Good morning. Good to have you here. Good to be here. I want you to know you're getting a rerun lesson this morning. I was in Cedar Key preaching last week, and Mel asked me if I wanted to have somebody there teach a class, since he didn't want to put that duty on me too. And I said, no, I'll do it. I said, I'm starting a new class in Fernandina anyway, so I'll just practice it there. So anyhow, you're getting a rerun from what I did. I did it there, but actually prepared it for you. And this next week, I'm going to be again down there preaching, and I'm going to be doing the next lesson. And before you see it, they'll see it. But after that, you'll get everything virgin. So I guess that's okay.
Well, you don't know that.
Huh?
You don't know that.
I don't know anything.
You might get asked again down there.
Yeah, I guess I could. I don't anticipate it. I'm surprised they asked me back a second time. The preacher at Cedar Key he preached at Cedar Key for years, and then he became a missionary for the Ukraine, and he was in the Ukraine for several years, and he was widowed, and he remarried while he was in Ukraine, married a Ukrainian woman. And so after everything kind of went crazy there, he told the church he needed to go back and check on the church and check on her family. So he and his wife went back, and they're there now. Now, as of a couple days ago, I haven't seen this morning, but he was actually in Hungary rather than in Ukraine, but that's where the people had kind of fled to and retreated. But he's still looking after them, and he's going to be there through the entire month. And somebody else is preaching the other 2 Sundays. I did not want to be gone this Sunday primarily because of outdoors dinner last night. I didn't want to miss that. And then I wanted to be here for Easter Sunday as well. And so I told him I could only do 2 of them, but he had somebody else he called on for the others. So today we're going to start looking at the parables. And this is kind of an introductory lesson. And you'll understand what I mean as I get going on that. When you come to the parables, you have to deal with the question, what is a parable?
We don't do a bird thing first.
I don't do birds. I'm sorry, I don't know one bird from another. That's not my gift. It's kind of like trees. Somebody will show me a tree. What kind of tree is that? I don't know what kind of tree that is. If somebody tells me that's a live oak, I'll say that's a live oak, but otherwise I don't. And I know the ones with the long skinny things on them, they're pines or firs or something. I don't know. But spruce, I think some of them spruce, but I really don't know the trees. I don't know birds. What is a parable? I do know parables. What's a parable? It's your turn, by the way. Your turn. What's a parable? A story?
Example of how something could work out.
Okay, that's right. What else? How else do you define it, David?
A story about an everyday occurrence that's familiar to the people you tell it to, and conveys entirely different message.
Okay, a story that's about everyday kind of thing that everybody's familiar with, but it's applied to a different kind of message. Yes. Very good. Any other? Those are both good. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. An earthly story of a heavenly meeting. I actually got that very same definition in Cedar Key. So that must come from Cedar Key. Yeah. Now, actually, I heard that growing up myself. So that does not mean Carolyn's as old as I am. You're not, are you? No. But I heard that, but all those are right. And so that's what we're talking about. Here in Luke chapter 6, verse 39, he told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall in the pit? Now, if I was reading through here in chapter 6, and if it didn't begin with the words, he also told them this parable, I would not automatically think of the next sentence as a parable. Would you? Because it's not really a story. It is, however, it is an allusion to something that's common, that has to do with an earthly event, blind men leading blind men, but he's applying it to something besides a physically blind person. He's applying it to a spiritual reality. So it's called, however, very specifically, it's called a parable. He goes on to say a student is not above his teacher, but everyone who's fully trained will be like his teacher. That too is a parable. Now he's applying it to spiritual teaching, but they know it in the context also of just everyday synagogue life, where that's where children learned in that era of time. In Luke 5, he told them this parable. No one here tears a patch from a new garment and sews it on an old one. If he does, he will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And so the idea of sewing a new patch on an old garment, on an old cloth, it doesn't work very well. But notice, this is kind of an illustration, but it's not usually what we think of when we think of parable. We think of, give me an example of a parable. What's your favorite parable? Parable of the prodigal son. But that's kind of like a story that has a kind of a beginning and the end, and has a narrative as part of it. But this is really just, it's something less than that, but it's a parable. How do I know it's a parable? Well, Luke says it's a parable. He says it's a parable. So he's telling us this is Jesus' way of teaching. This is Luke 4. And he said to them, doubtless ye will say unto me this parable, Physician, heal thyself. Whatsoever we have done at Capernaum, do here in thine own country. So we have heard that done in Capernaum, do here. Well, I don't think that is a parable, but he's called it a parable. In fact, this is the Greek language, and see the word underlined at the top, parable. Down at the bottom is parabolin. And parabolin is the Greek word for parable. And so the word parable in English is actually just the Greek word put in English characters. Kind of like the word baptism. Baptizo is the Greek, baptism is the English. It's actually just the Greek word put in English characters. The same as deacon. Diakonos, deacon. It's the word put in English characters. And so when we use the word parable, or we use the word deacon, or we use the word baptism, we're actually using Greek words that we've adopted into our own language, and we've put our own characters to them. In Mark 7, again Jesus called the crowd to him, and he said, Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. And after he left the crowd, he entered the house, and his disciples asked him about this parable. Now again, this is a little bit more verbiage than some of these other parables, but it still doesn't fit my image of a parable. But it is. He's talking about the physical, but he's transferring the meaning to something that's deeper than that. It's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but it's what comes out of a man that defiles him. And it's not the food we eat that defiles us. And I'm going to use graphic language here, but it's the vomit that defiles us. And sometimes we are guilty of spiritual vomiting. And that's what he's calling our attention to. What Old Testament parables come to mind? Now, when we think of parables, we think of the parables of Jesus. But Jesus did not invent the parable. He utilized it very fully, but he didn't invent it. In fact, you find parables used quite a number of times in the Old Testament. Does any parables specifically come to mind for you?
The one that Nathan told David when he was trying to convict him of sin.
Very good. The one Nathan told David. That's one of the ones I'm going to show in a minute. That's right. What's another one? I've got to admit to you that's the very first one that came to my mind when I started this study.
Are some of the Proverbs parallels? I'm asking you.
Yes, I think they are. I'm not sure if they're on my list, but yeah, because of the way they're used. Yes, they are. But they would be one of those short ones that don't fit our normal image of parables. Here's one in Isaiah 5. I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of the stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out the winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers of Jerusalem and men of Judah, but judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I'll tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its walls, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and the briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. Now, what is he talking about? This is Isaiah. What's he talking about? He's speaking the word of the Lord to the people. This is the word of the Lord to the people. What is the vineyard? Israel. Yes, it's Israel. In fact, if you keep on reading, he says, the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are the garden of his delight. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. He looked for good fruit, but he found only bad fruit. Well, how did he get this message over to them? He started talking about his vineyard and about the good fruit and the bad fruit. And all of them who were an agricultural people, they understood the disappointment when one looks for a good crop and gets only bad crop. They understood. They understood the disappointment in that. And so by beginning with this parable, he's driving home the message to them that they needed to hear. He's disappointed in them because they've not produced the fine harvest that he had anticipated. The next parable is the one that John cited. This is one that you're familiar with. What's the setting? Nathan's parable. What's the setting?
David had just had a relationship with Bathsheba.
David had just had this relationship with Bathsheba. He had sinned. He had sinned terribly.
Killed Nathan.
Killed Bathsheba's husband, or had him taken to the front line and then had them withdraw and let him be slaughtered. And so this was a really, really bad deed. But if Nathan had come to him and just said, "Shame on you," it wouldn't have had the same effect. Rather, he came and he said, now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man." So this is a parable that's told to get the message over to David. Did it work? Yes, it worked. And very probably it would not have been nearly as effective if he had just come in and said, "Shame on you, David." But by telling him this parable and stirring within him a rise of anger against this person doing this injustice, he was ready for David then to say, "You're the one I'm talking about." Yes?
The lamb wasn't just a lamb, it was the man's pet.
Pet lamb.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a household loved lamb. And instead of using his own. And so this is a list of 12 parables. And most of these you're probably familiar with. The ones that come to mind, I think, most is the one, wrong way. There we go. Now if I can hit the right button. Trees make a king. You remember that one? Trees make a king. The trees want a king. And so they go to this one kind of tree, and that tree says, "No, I don't want, my job's too important. I don't want to give up what I do to become your yes man." Then the trees go to another tree and say, "Why don't you be our king?" And no, what I do is too important. I can't. And so finally the trees go to this bramble. I want translation, a bramble bush. And the bramble bush says, "Okay, I'll be your king." Well, it's a parable. Let's see if I think this is it. When Jotham was told about this, he was told about his brothers being killed. What had happened is this individual had come in who was kind of like a nobody, and he was kind of a stepbrother in the family, and he knew that he was not really in line to become the king, and so he created a kind of an alliance with his kind of clan, and they raised the money for him to campaign, to lack of better, in our language today, to put his campaign together. And so he put together this campaign, and so he hired a bunch of no good thugs, and they went down to where the brothers were. There were 70 brothers who were in line to be king, beheaded him, and he killed them all. These thugs killed them all. And then he was made king. And so when Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the mountain. Jotham was the one son who escaped. He got away. And he went up on Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." Now, what do you get from olives? Olive trees. Olives, olive oil, all kind of olive product. And we use that kind of stuff, don't we? I don't know about you, but I use a lot of olive oil, and I love olives. Some better than others, but the green olives, I love the green olives. But when the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil, which by both gods and humans are honored and hold sway over the trees?" Next the king went to the fig tree, come and be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees? And the trees went to the vine, come and be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come and be our king. And the thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let the fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. So what's a thorn bush good for? Nothing. You know, a fig tree is of value, an olive tree is of value, the vine is of value, the thorn bush is worthless, but the thorn bush was elected king.
We still do.
We're still doing that? That was a parable. Okay, how many parables did Jesus tell? How many parables did Jesus tell?
25.
25? That's a guess. I can tell the hesitation in your voice. 76, okay. 76, guess. 31? 39. 39? 22. It depends on who's counting. A little over 30 is the count that you normally get. You'll find it very difficult to find someone nailing it down to specifically one, because some of those parables are like I just cited, there may be one sentence, and some are not. Now, why did Jesus tell parables? Okay, he was using it in a relationship to people he was speaking. Very good. Heavenly message with an earthly illustration. Okay. What else? To teach. Why else?
Well, that was kind of how Jesus taught.
That was his primary way of doing it. Some of the writers say. Yes. What else? Did he have any other motives? Ulterior motives? Well, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Make them think, yes. Okay, easier way to relate to them. Okay. Yes.
Could it be that it allowed him to call certain groups out without specifically calling them out?
Okay. He allowed him to call certain individuals out without incriminating himself. How's that? Is that what you're saying? Okay. And
come to the conclusion kind of on their own instead of being forced by it.
okay, very good. Yes, John.
There's a text that implies that he didn't want some people to get his message.
Yeah.
And he told it in parables to kind of befuddle.
I think that's considering close to what Dave's saying. Absolutely. And so we would say it today, speaking in code. Isn't that the way we would put it? Here's the text you're thinking about, John. When he was alone, the 12 and others around him asked him about the parables, and he told them, the secrets of the kingdom has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. It's a hard text. What he's saying, he wants them to be searchers of the truth. He doesn't want them to accidentally stumble on the truth. There are quite a number of places in Scripture where it says, blessed is the one who searches after me. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it will be open to you. And so the gospel is actually for those that are searching for it. not for those who stumble onto it. And this is Mark's talking, and this is Mark's presentation of Jesus' explanation of parables. And so parables actually served a variety of different functions depending on, and you can see in the context of some of the parables he tells, it's pretty clear the reason for telling the parable. In other parables, it's a little bit more difficult to see the motivation behind the parable. How is one to interpret parables? I didn't hear that.
Read between the lines.
Read between the lines? Okay.
I think context.
Context? Context is a biggie, yes. Context. The audience makes a difference, absolutely.
Well, we've all, for many, many years, heard about the parable.
Uh-huh.
And maybe understand. What about somebody that never heard of it?
That's right.
That they don't, how, when your question is, how should we interpret it? But suppose there's this person that never heard the parable. How should they interpret it? They just heard it, you know.
Good question. It's a good question. How is a person, yes, Laura.
Is it possible that throughout the hundreds of years these parables have been out, depending on when they heard it, it can mean different things?
Yep, that's right. Laura said that through these hundreds of years the parable has been told, depending on how you heard it, can convey a different message to you. There was a period of time, I believe during the 3rd, 4th century, when the standard, I'm trying to think of the right word, homiletic was allegory. Everything was interpreted allegorically. It was a period, like a couple hundred years, that's kind of the way it was done commonly. Now, we don't tend to do that, but there was a period of time in history in which that was very strongly true. One of the things I've often heard as I've sat in classes through the years, and believe it or not, I've sat in a lot of classes in my younger years especially, in which I wasn't the teacher. But even when I was a teacher and teaching on parables, I've heard people explain parables, and they'll take one parable, maybe a very short parable, and they'll pull out 20 different messages out of it. Now, I suggest to you, sometimes we read into parables messages that are really not there. And so, rule number one is we look for the primary focus of the message. And we be very careful about expanding beyond the primary focus of a message to those that maybe fit the occasion for us, but that's not what the parable is saying. And looking at the audience and the context, it becomes very important for us to really come to what the parable is telling us. Here's a text. It says, the first rule of interpreting parables then is to find out the central truth of the parable sets forth. What is the main lesson of the story? And we really get into danger when we start kind of putting our message in the parable and passing it off as this is what the Bible teaches. And probably all of us have been teaching, have been guilty of that at some time or another, including myself. And then the second rule is to understand the parable in light of the circumstances of its origin, which goes back to what was the occasion and who was the audience that was speaking. And as we go through these parables, one of the things we'll be looking at every week as we look at different parables, we'll be focusing on who the audience is. Okay, why did he tell this parable, and what was the message he was trying to communicate? And that's just very important to the whole process of parables. What are the parables that are recorded? Teaching us. Okay, very good. These are the parables that are recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In other words, you'll find them in all of the books. And these are the only ones you'll find in all of them. The children of the bridegroom, the patches of the old garment, the new wine and old wineskins, the sower, the mustard seed, the wicked husbandman, and the fig tree. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all of them tell these parables. And there will be a slight variance in the wording from one to the other, even maybe the emphasis from one to the other, but all of these are found in those books. These parables are found only in Matthew and Luke, and they're not found in Mark. The wise and the foolish builder, children of the marketplace, the leaven, the lost sheep, and the wise steward. You don't find any of these in Mark. None. But you find them in both Matthew and Luke. What does that tell you? Well, one theological theory that has been pretty commonly accepted through the years in conservative scholarship is that both Matthew and Luke had access to Mark. And there's just a lot in Mark that you find almost word for word in one of the others. But these are parables that did not come from Mark, and so you don't find them in all of them. Now, these are the parables that are found only in Matthew. They're not found in Mark, they're not found in Luke, but they're found only in Matthew. The parable of the tares, the hidden treasure, the precious pearl, the dragnet, the householder, the unmerciful servant, the laborer in the vineyard, the two sons, the marriage of the king's son and the wedding garment, the 10 virgins, the talents, the sheep and the goats. You find these only in Matthew. These are found only in Mark. They're not found in Matthew, not found in Luke. Only 2, the seed grown by itself and the porter on watch. And I dare say these are not 2 parables that are your favorites or the best known by you. Look at that list. These parables are found only in Luke. Don't find it in Matthew, don't find it in Mark. They're found only in Luke. And Luke becomes actually our resource for probably our favorite parables. The 2 debtors, the Good Samaritan, of course that's right at the top of people's favorite list. Friends at midnight, the rich fool, the watchful servant, the barren fig tree, the chief seats, the feast for the poor, the great supper, the tower, the king, the lost coin, the prodigal son, already mentioned as a favorite to all of us, I think. Dishonest steward, the rich man and Lazarus, another favorite. The persistent widow, the Pharisee and the publican, the one praying, another favorite, and the pounds. Now, which one of these parables is sometimes debated as to whether or not it's a parable? The rich man and Lazarus, that's right. I don't know who said that, but you're right. And why? It is the only parable that has names, Lazarus. It's the only one. And so there are those that debate whether that is actually a parable or not. And that's the reason. Now, which gospel does not have any parables? John. Not one. Wonder why?
Well, it was certainly written for the audience. Maybe his audience wasn't used to that method of teaching.
Well, his audience was set different. His motive was very specific and different. Yes.
Well, I just have a question, and it kind of goes back to when you were talking about the way that it was kind of cryptic, parable. So do you think that maybe he did that to weed out the people who just wanted to be in the trend?
Yes. I think that's part of what we're dealing with. We're also dealing with the fact that there were those who were trying to entrap him, and so he could talk about those trying to trap him and not incriminate himself. And so both of those were very much a part of it. I think it's also, if you go all the way to Revelation, part of what Revelation is in the apocalyptic language is because it was to get past the guard, so to speak, who were at that time heavy on Christians. So, yes.
You know, when you talk about the fact that he really does want people to seek him, I've often said to myself, it's good for us to remember that no one accidentally becomes a Christian.
That's right. And that is good for us to remember.
In history, nobody has ever accidentally become.
That's right. I have a good friend that was with me in graduate school. He was studying for the ministry. Now, he never did go into professional ministry. To be honest, he was just shy as could be, and he's just really, really shy. He was my next door neighbor in graduate school in apartments, and good man. But you know, he didn't grow up in a house of faith. He grew up in a non-believer's faith, in a non-believer's home. But he said, from my early childhood, he said, I had an interest in God. And he said, when I got to be a teenager, he said, my friends would sneak away and go to the bars. He said, I'd sneak away and go to church. That's what he did. And he said, I would go to one and then another and then another, and he said, trying my best to find out, what I could about Jesus. And he said, I cannot explain why it was the way it was, but he said, I was always intrigued with church. I had years later, now he ended up spending his life working for the University of Michigan, and he's retired now, of course, but a good man. But that was his story about himself. When I was in Texas ministering, a long time ago now, but I had a 32, 33-year-old woman come see me one day, and she was worried about her mother. Her mother wouldn't let her go to church when she was a young girl, and the girl always wanted to go to church, and her mother wouldn't even let her go with her friends. She wouldn't let her go to church at all. And so she told me the same thing. She said, when I got my driver's license, she said my friends would sneak off and go to bars. Said I sneaked off and went to church. And she now was in her early to mid-30s, and she was worried about the soul of her mother, wanted to know how to reach her. And if I had any ideas, and I gave her some ideas. I don't know if they worked or not, but I never met this woman before in my life. She had plugged into a Lutheran church and was very active. And what she did tell me about her mother is her mother had been in the Church of Christ and got offended at some point and vowed never to go back to any church. And so she figured if anybody's going to reach her, it's going to be the Church of Christ. But I wasn't sure that ever happened. So, but she was just painfully worried for her mother. And I understood. But two different people told me that they sneaked off and went to the church when they got their driver's license, which I just thought was kind of incredible. That's it.